Snow fell in thick, quiet sheets, turning the city into a muted painting of white and gray. The streetlights glowed like tired stars, their lights softened by the drifting flakes. A black luxury sedan rolled slowly down the narrow road, its tires crunching against the frozen slush. Inside, Victor Hale sat alone in the back seat, his posture straight, his expression distant. The world outside the window felt far away, like something happening to someone else. He was used to speed, to movement, to places blurring together as deals were closed and fortunes expanded. Tonight, though, something had made him ask the driver to slow down. Victor was a man who owned towers of glass and steel, whose name was spoken in boardrooms with respect and sometimes fear. His calendar was filled months in advance, every hour measured and monetized. Yet as the car passed through this older part of the city, a strange weight pressed against his chest. These streets had not changed much in decades. The buildings leaned toward each other as if sharing secrets, their brick faces worn and cracked. Snow clung to fire escapes and window ledges, hiding rust and decay beneath a fragile beauty. The car stopped at a red light, and Victor's gaze drifted to the sidewalk. A figure stood there, half hidden by the swirling snow. At first glance, it was just another shadow in winter, another person bracing against the cold. Then the figure moved, and Victor felt something tighten inside him. It was a boy, no older than 12 or 13, bundled in a thin jacket that was far too small. His hands were bare, red and trembling as he tried to warm them by breathing into his palms. A cardboard sign hung from his neck, its edges bent and damp. The words were written in uneven letters, struggling to stay legible through the snow. Victor leaned forward, narrowing his eyes, as if distance alone had been the problem. He had seen poverty before, of course. He had written checks to charities, posed for photographs, attended galas where suffering was described in neat sentences and tasteful slides. This felt different. The boy wasn't asking for money. He wasn't reaching out to passing cars or pedestrians. He was simply standing there, staring across the street at a bakery window glowing with warm yellow light. Inside, people laughed, steam fogged the glass, and trays of bread and pastries sat like small miracles. The light turned green, but Victor didn't notice. The driver hesitated, then cleared his throat softly. "Sir, wait," Victor said, his voice sharper than he intended. The car remained still as horns sounded behind them, impatient and angry. Victor barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the boy, on the way his shoulders hunched as a gust of wind cut through him, on the way he tried to act older than he was, as if pride were the only coat he owned that a memory stirred, unwanted and sudden. Victor saw himself at 10 years old, standing in a kitchen that smelled of cold metal and burned coffee. He remembered his mother's hands, rough and cracked, counting coins on the table. He remembered the sound of the landlord knocking, the way his heart had raced even though he knew the knock wasn't for him. He had buried those memories under decades of success, under numbers and contracts and applause. Yet here they were, rising through the snow. "Pull over," Victor said. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, surprised. "Here, sir." "Yes, right here." The car eased toward the curb, tires sliding slightly before stopping. Victor opened the door, and the cold rushed in, sharp and immediate, biting through his coat. For a moment, he stood there, hesitating. He wasn't sure why he was getting out. He told himself it was curiosity, or guilt, or maybe just the need to prove that he was still capable of doing something unplanned. But as his feet touched the snow-covered sidewalk, he knew it was something deeper. The boy noticed him then. His eyes widened, not with hope, but with caution. He took a small step back, as if expecting to be scolded or chased away. Victor raised a hand, not in greeting, but in reassurance. He walked slowly, deliberately, aware of how imposing he must look in his tailored coat and polished shoes. When he was close enough, he read the sign. "I'm not lazy. I'm cold. My mom is sick." The words hit him harder than any accusation could have. Victor swallowed, feeling his throat tighten. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy hesitated, then answered quietly. "Eli. How long have you been standing out here, Eli?" "Since it started getting dark," the boy said. "People don't stop much when it snows." Victor nodded, as if this were a business report, as if he could analyze it and move on. But his eyes drifted again to the bakery, to the warmth just across the street. "Have you eaten today?" Eli shook his head, embarrassed. I had some bread this morning. Victor looked at the boy's shoes, thin sneakers soaked through, snow seeping in at the seams. He looked at the boy's hands, at the way his breath came out in short, controlled puffs. He felt a strange, almost painful disbelief rising inside him. In a city where he owned entire blocks, a child could stand freezing, invisible, while life moved on around him. Come with me, Victor said suddenly. Eli stiffened. Where? Just across the street, Victor replied, nodding toward the bakery. To get warm. The boy studied his face, searching for something, perhaps a lie or a threat. The snow continued to fall, settling on both of them, erasing their outlines. Finally, Eli nodded once. As they stepped off the curb together, Victor felt the world tilt, just slightly. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this impossible pause on a snow-covered street, was about to change everything he thought he knew about himself, about wealth, and about what it truly meant to see another human being. The car sped through the wet roads, tires hissing against the slick asphalt as the city lights blurred into long streaks of white and gold outside the windows. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The little girl sat curled on the leather seat, wrapped tightly in the heavy coat, her small fingers clutching the fabric as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. Every bump in the road made her flinch, not from fear of the speed, but from fear of time slipping away. She whispered her mother's name over and over, like a fragile spell, her lips barely moving. Across from her, the mafia boss sat silently, his gaze fixed forward, jaw clenched, mind racing in ways it rarely did. He had ordered rescues before, cleanups, punishments, but this was different. This wasn't about territory or money. This was about a rope around a woman's neck and a child who still believed someone powerful enough could make it right. The forest road narrowed quickly, asphalt giving way to gravel, then dirt. Mud splashed up against the sides of the vehicle as they drove deeper into darkness. The guards exchanged quiet signals, spreading out when the car finally stopped, weapons discreetly drawn, eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. The rain was lighter here, filtered by thick branches overhead, but the air smelled damp and heavy, full of rot and earth. The girl jumped out before anyone could stop her, her small feet slipping as she ran ahead, guided by memory and terror. This way, she cried, her voice thin but determined. The boss followed close behind, his shoes sinking into wet leaves, ignoring the mud ruining them. He watched the child carefully, noting how she didn't hesitate, how she didn't slow down even when branches scratched her arms. This wasn't a story she had imagined. This was a path burned into her mind by horror. Then he saw it. The shape of the old oak loomed ahead, massive and twisted, its branches stretching like skeletal arms into the night. A rope hung from one of those branches, swaying slightly with the wind. The girl screamed again, a sound so raw it made the men around her tense instantly. Her mother hung there, limp, her body streaked with mud and rain, her hair plastered to her face. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The boss moved first. Cut her down, he barked, his voice sharp, slicing through the shock. Two men rushed forward, knives flashing. The rope fell away, and they caught the woman's body before it hit the ground, lowering her gently onto the wet earth. The girl dropped beside her, sobbing uncontrollably, pressing her ear to her mother's chest. "Mama, please," she cried. "Please wake up." One of the men checked for a pulse, his fingers steady despite the urgency. "She's alive," he said finally. The words released something tight and painful from the girl's chest, but the danger wasn't over. The woman's breathing was shallow, uneven, her lips tinged blue. The boss crouched down, studying her condition with a focus that surprised even himself. "Get her to the car," he ordered. "Now." They lifted the woman carefully, supporting her head and neck, moving fast but controlled. The girl refused to let go, climbing into the car with her, holding her mother's hand as if afraid it might slip away forever. The return drive felt longer, heavier. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches clawing at the car as if trying to pull them back. Inside, one of the men applied pressure where the rope had burned into the woman's skin. Another kept watch on her breathing. The boss sat opposite the girl again, watching the way she stroked her mother's hair. whispering reassurances that sounded far too grown-up for someone so small. When they reached the estate, doctors were already waiting, summoned with a single call. They rushed the woman inside, bright lights and clean floors replacing mud and darkness in an instant. The girl tried to follow, panic rising when strong hands gently held her back. "Let them help her," the boss said firmly, kneeling in front of her again. "She needs this." The girl nodded reluctantly, tears dripping onto the polished floor as she hugged herself. Minutes stretched into hours. She sat on a wide sofa, feet dangling, wrapped now in a blanket, clutching a cup of warm tea she barely drank. The estate was silent in a way she had never known, vast and echoing. The boss paced nearby, hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. One of his men approached quietly. "The men from the hills," he said. "We can find them." The boss didn't answer immediately. His gaze flicked to the girl, who was staring at the closed door behind which her mother lay fighting for her life. "You will," he said finally, his voice low. "But not yet." The man nodded and disappeared. When the doctor finally emerged, the girl jumped to her feet, nearly dropping the cup. "Is she okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor smiled gently. "She's stable," he said. "She'll live." The girl burst into tears again, this time from relief, her small body shaking as if all the fear she'd been holding back had finally been released. Without thinking, she ran forward and hugged the boss around the waist, pressing her face into his coat. The guards stiffened, ready to intervene, but the boss raised a hand, stopping them. He stood there, surprised by the warmth of her, by the way her grip was so tight, so trusting. Slowly, awkwardly, he placed a hand on her back. It was the first time in years he had touched someone without calculating what it would cost him. As the girl cried quietly against him, he stared ahead, thoughts darkening. Someone had hung a woman from a tree and expected the world to look away. Tonight, the world hadn't, and that meant there would be consequences. They left the bakery wrapped in borrowed warmth, the kind that lingered in the bones even as the cold tried to reclaim them. Victor held the door open as Eli stepped back onto the sidewalk, clutching a paper bag heavy with bread and pastries. The snow had thickened, muting the city further, turning headlights into soft halos and footsteps into whispers. For a moment, they stood side by side, breath rising in pale clouds, the contrast between Victor's tailored coat and Eli's thin jacket stark under the streetlight. "Where do you live?" Victor asked gently. Eli hesitated, then pointed down the street. "That way. Not far." Victor glanced toward his car, where the driver waited, engine idling, warmth and leather seats just a few steps away. Then he looked back at Eli, at the way the boy shifted his weight, as if preparing himself for a walk he'd already taken too many times. "It's cold," Victor said. "Let us take you." Eli stiffened again. "I don't want trouble." "You won't get any," Victor replied. "I promise." After a long pause, Eli nodded. They walked together to the car. The driver opened the door, surprise flickering across his face when he saw the boy, but he said nothing. Eli climbed in carefully, eyes wide as he took in the spotless interior, the quiet hum of the heater. He pressed his hands against the vent, marveling at the warmth pouring out. Victor slid in beside him, the door closing with a soft, final sound as the car moved. Eli gave directions in short, careful sentences. The streets grew narrower, the buildings older and more worn. Christmas lights blinked weakly in a few windows, their cheer struggling against peeling paint and boarded doors. Victor watched it all with a growing sense of disbelief. He knew these streets existed, had seen them on reports and maps, but moving through them like this felt different. It felt personal. The car stopped in front of a building that looked more like a memory than a place to live. Its sign hung crooked above a darkened storefront, the letters faded beyond recognition. A narrow staircase led up the side, its steps slick with ice. Eli gathered his bag and reached for the door. "I'll walk you up," Victor said. They climbed slowly, Victor gripping the railing, Eli moving ahead with practiced ease. At the top, Eli unlocked a door that opened into a single, dimly lit room. A small space heater hummed in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the cold seeping through the walls. A thin mattress lay on the floor, covered with mismatched blankets. The air smelled faintly of medicine and damp fabric. "Mom?" Eli called softly. A shape shifted on the mattress. A woman's face emerged from the blankets, pale and drawn, her eyes too large in her thin face. She struggled to sit up. "Eli," she said, her voice weak but warm. "You shouldn't be out so long." "I brought food," Eli said quickly, holding up the bag as if it were proof of something important. Then he glanced at Victor, uncertain. He helped me." Victor stepped forward, removing his gloves. "My name is Victor," he said. "I hope it's all right that I came up." The woman studied him, taking in his coat, his posture, the calm authority that clung to him even now. "Thank you," she said after a moment. "I'm Anna." Victor nodded. His gaze moved around the room, taking in every detail. The empty medicine bottles, the single chair, the cracked window taped with plastic. He felt something heavy settle in his chest, a mix of anger and shame. This was not a sudden misfortune. This was a slow, grinding struggle, invisible to most. Eli knelt by his mother, unpacking the food with careful hands. "He got hot chocolate," he said, smiling for the first time. "And bread. Real bread." Anna reached out, touching Eli's cheek. "You didn't have to," he insisted, Eli said, glancing at Victor with a small grin. Victor cleared his throat. "May I ask," he said carefully, "have you seen a doctor recently?" Anna's smile faded. "It's expensive," she said simply. "We manage." Victor felt disbelief sharpen into something else, something dangerously close to fury. He thought of the private clinics he funded, the medical wings with his name etched into marble. He thought of the meetings where costs were discussed in abstract terms, detached from faces like Anna's. "Do you mind if I make a call?" Victor asked. Anna hesitated, pride and exhaustion warring in her expression. "I don't want charity," she said quietly. Victor met her gaze. "Neither do I," he said. "I want to help. There's a difference." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Victor stepped aside, pulling out his phone. His voice was low, controlled, as he spoke to someone on the other end. He gave an address, asked questions, listened, then asked more. When he hung up, something in his expression had changed. The businessman was still there, but so was something else, something raw and human. "A doctor will come tomorrow morning," Victor said. "A good one. And there will be heat, proper heat, by tonight." Anna stared at him, disbelief and fear mingling in her eyes. "Why?" she asked. Victor looked at Eli, who was watching him intently, as if afraid this might all disappear. "Because no child should have to stand in the snow to keep his family alive," Victor said quietly. "And because I walked past too many times before." Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the heater. Snow tapped softly against the window. Eli's eyes filled with tears he tried hard not to let fall. "You don't even know us," Anna whispered. Victor nodded. "I know enough." As he turned to leave, promising to return in the morning, Victor felt the weight of what he had seen settle deep inside him. The snow-covered street where he had stopped no longer felt like an accident. It felt like a reckoning. And as he stepped back into the cold night, he realized that what he couldn't believe wasn't the poverty or the suffering. It was how close it had been all along, and how long he had chosen not to see it. Days passed, and the estate settled into a strange rhythm that none of its inhabitants had ever known before. The little girl woke each morning to sunlight instead of fear, to quiet hallways instead of shouting, and every time she opened her eyes, the first thing she did was check that her mother was still there. Each time, she was. The woman grew stronger slowly, color returning to her cheeks, her fingers tightening with life when she held her daughter's hand. She spoke little at first, her voice rough from the damage to her throat, but her eyes said everything. Gratitude, confusion, and a deep, trembling fear of losing what had been given back to her. The mafia boss visited the room daily, sometimes standing silently near the door, sometimes stepping inside with measured calm. He never stayed long, yet his presence carried weight. The woman tried to thank him once, her voice breaking as she struggled for words. He stopped her with a slight shake of his head. "You don't owe me," he said simply, though even he wasn't sure why he believed that. Still, not everyone within the estate welcomed this unexpected change. Whispers began among the men, cautious at first, then more open. They spoke of softness, of distractions, of risks. A boss who let emotion guide him was a boss who could be weakened. One evening, as the girl played quietly on the floor with colored pencils someone had brought her, A trusted lieutenant approached the boss in his study. This situation, the man began carefully, it's changing things. People are noticing. The boss didn't look up from the window, where he watched the grounds below, the girl's laughter faint but real. Let them notice, he replied. Anyone who mistakes mercy for weakness doesn't belong here. The lieutenant hesitated. And the child, he asked. The boss finally turned. His eyes were cold. The child stays. That ended the conversation. But danger has a way of arriving uninvited. One night, long after the estate had gone quiet, the alarms whispered instead of screamed, subtle enough that only trained ears caught them. The boss was awake instantly, instinct sharp. He moved silently through the halls as his men took positions. The breach was small but deliberate. Someone had been sent, not to attack openly, but to test. In the confusion, a single figure slipped deeper into the estate, moving with purpose. At the same moment, the little girl woke from a nightmare, sitting bolt upright, heart racing. She listened, sensing something was wrong. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Too close. She slid off the bed quietly, her mother sleeping heavily from medication, and crept toward the door. Before she could open it, the handle turned. The door cracked open, and a shadow filled the gap. She froze, fear locking her body in place. The intruder stepped inside, face partially covered, eyes scanning the room. His gaze landed on her, and something cruel flickered there. Found you, he whispered. She tried to scream, but terror stole her voice. At that exact moment, the boss appeared in the doorway behind the man, gun already raised. Step away, he said calmly. The intruder spun, too slow. The shot was precise, controlled. The man collapsed without another sound. The girl sank to the floor, shaking violently. The boss moved to her in seconds, lowering himself in front of her. It's over, he said firmly. You're safe. She threw herself into his arms, sobbing, clinging to him with a desperation that cut deeper than any blade. He held her without hesitation, one arm around her small back, the other shielding her as his men cleared the room. When her mother woke to the sound of voices, she found her daughter alive and unhurt, pressed against the chest of the most feared man in the city. Tears streamed silently down her face. That night, the boss made a decision that rippled through his entire world. Security doubled, then tripled. Names were crossed out. Alliances were reconsidered. And quietly, discreetly, he arranged new documents, new identities, a future that didn't involve selling flowers on dangerous streets. In the following days, the girl stopped flinching at sudden sounds. She laughed more freely. She followed the boss around with innocent curiosity, asking questions no one else dared to ask. Why is your house so big? Why do people look scared when they see you? He answered some, avoided others, but he listened to all of them. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden, she looked up at him and said, "You're not bad." He stopped walking. "Who told you I was?" he asked. She shrugged. "People like you on the outside are usually bad," she said simply. Then she smiled. "But you saved my mama." He felt something tighten painfully in his chest. That night, as he sat alone in his study, surrounded by symbols of power that suddenly felt hollow, he realized the truth he had been avoiding. Saving that woman hadn't been the turning point. Holding that child as she cried had been. The world he ruled was built on fear, but the world now sleeping under his roof was built on trust. And for the first time in his life, he understood that protecting it would cost him more than money or blood. It would cost him the man he used to be. The tension that followed the night of the intrusion did not fade quickly. It settled into the walls of the estate like a warning written in invisible ink. The men moved with sharper eyes, fingers closer to hidden weapons, conversations lowered to murmurs that stopped whenever the boss passed by. Yet inside the protected rooms, something entirely different was growing. The woman recovered steadily, each day sitting up a little longer, walking a few more steps with help, her strength returning not just to her body but to her spirit. She watched her daughter laugh in the gardens, chase birds along the paths, and she cried quietly when no one was looking, overwhelmed by how close she had come to losing everything. One afternoon, when the sun was warm and forgiving, she asked to speak with the boss alone. He found her sitting near the window, hands folded, eyes serious but calm. "I know who you are," she said before he could speak. "I know what people say." He nodded once, accepting it. "And yet," she continued, "you saved my life. You saved my child." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. I don't know why. I don't know what it costs a man like you to do something like that. But I need you to understand something. She met his gaze directly. You didn't just rescue us. You gave my daughter back her future. The words hit him harder than any threat ever had. He looked away, jaw tightening. The future is fragile, he replied. This world doesn't forgive easily. She smiled faintly. Neither do children, she said. But they remember. From that day on, the girl began calling the estate home without hesitation. She filled the silence with questions and stories, her presence softening corners that had been sharp for years. Some of the men found themselves smiling without realizing it, then quickly hiding it as if caught doing something forbidden. Not everyone approved. Messages came from rivals testing boundaries, sensing a shift. One evening, a warning arrived in the form of a burned car left near the outer road, a message clear enough without words. The boss studied the wreckage under the cold glow of headlights, his expression unreadable. He knew what they were saying. Compassion was a crack, and cracks could be exploited. That night, he made another decision. He called a meeting, faces gathered around a long table, tension thick. This ends, he said simply. Anyone who thinks using a child or her mother as leverage is making a mistake they won't live to regret. There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. The message traveled fast. After that, the threat stopped. Weeks later, the woman was strong enough to walk the garden paths alone. She and her daughter stood by a small tree near the edge of the grounds, its branches young and flexible. The girl touched the leaves gently. "Mama," she said softly, "trees aren't scary anymore." The woman knelt and held her close, tears filling her eyes. The boss watched from a distance, something heavy easing in his chest. He realized then that fear had lost its grip on at least one small heart in this world, and somehow, that mattered more than any empire he controlled. But peace never lasts forever. One morning, news arrived that a powerful alliance was forming against him, fueled by those who believed he had grown weak. Plans were drawn, strategies laid out, violence anticipated. The boss stood alone in his study afterward, staring at old photographs he rarely acknowledged. He thought of the girl asleep down the hall, clutching a stuffed toy someone had given her, of her mother humming softly while cooking simple meals in a kitchen that had once never been used for warmth. He understood the risk clearly now. Protecting them meant choosing a path that would eventually collide with his past. That evening, he sat with the girl on the steps outside, the sky painted with fading light. "Do you know what brave is?" he asked her. She thought for a moment. "It's when you're scared," she said. "But you do the right thing anyway." He smiled faintly. "That's a good answer." She looked up at him seriously. "Are you scared?" she asked. He didn't lie. "Yes," he said, "but I'm still here." She nodded, satisfied, and leaned against his side. In that quiet moment, he made peace with what was coming. He would face enemies, betrayal, and the cost of change, but he would not go back. Whatever happened next, the man who once ruled through fear alone no longer existed. And the child who had begged him at his gates had unknowingly rewritten the rules of his world. The final storm came quietly, not with sirens or explosions, but with a calm that felt unnatural, like the deep breath before a plunge. The boss sensed it long before the warning reached his ears. Years of survival had taught him to recognize the stillness that meant powerful people were moving pieces in the dark. He stood at the window before dawn, watching the estate grounds bathed in pale blue light, knowing that by nightfall everything could change. Behind him, the house slept. The girl lay curled beneath soft blankets, dreaming without fear for the first time in her life. Her mother slept nearby, her breathing steady and strong, unaware that forces beyond those walls were closing in. When the call finally came, it was brief. An alliance had formed, larger than expected, fueled by those who believed mercy was a weakness that needed to be corrected. They weren't coming to negotiate. The boss ended the call and remained still for a long moment. He didn't feel anger. He felt clarity. He gathered his men and spoke plainly, without speeches or promises. "Today decides what kind of future exists here," he said. "Not just for us." Orders were given, defenses set, exits secured. Yet one order surprised them all. By mid-morning, a convoy quietly left the estate, carrying the woman and her daughter away under heavy protection, new identities waiting at the end of the road. The girl hugged him fiercely before she left, her arms small but strong around his waist. "You promised," she whispered. He knelt and met her eyes. "And I keep my promises," he said. She smiled, trusting him completely, and that trust cut deeper than any threat ever could. When the gates closed behind the convoy, the estate felt suddenly empty. The confrontation came at sunset. Cars lined the outer road, shadows moving with intent. The boss stood firm as messages were exchanged, warnings ignored. But something unexpected happened. Instead of bloodshed, the truth began to unravel. Evidence surfaced, deals exposed, alliances weakened by betrayal within their own ranks. The boss had prepared for war, but he had also prepared for something smarter. By nightfall, the attack dissolved into retreat, its leaders scrambling to protect themselves from consequences they hadn't foreseen. The world didn't change in one dramatic moment. It shifted, slowly but unmistakably. Weeks later, the estate was quieter, but not hollow. The boss walked its halls knowing he had crossed a line he would never step back over. His power remained, but it had been reshaped. Fear no longer stood alone at its center. One afternoon, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a child's drawing. A big house, a small tree, 3 figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. On the back, written in uneven letters, were the words, "Mama smiles now. I'm not scared anymore." He folded the paper carefully and placed it in his desk, not as a reminder of danger, but as proof of something rare. He had been many things in his life: feared, obeyed, hated. But somewhere between a rain-soaked gate and a desperate plea, he had become something else too. A protector. And though the world would never fully know that story, it would feel its effects in quieter ways, in lives spared, in choices made differently. As night fell, he stood once more at the window, the city lights glowing beyond the walls, and for the first time, the future didn't look like a threat. It looked like a responsibility he was finally ready to carry.